Hannity, President Mike Pence, and now we're learning radio host Sebastian Gorka subpoenaing his cell phone records.
The most powerful and one of the greatest presidents we've ever had.
Gorka is suing the committee and Verizon to block that request. His lawyer arguing that unlike other targets, he wasn't involved in planning events on January 6th and only observed speeches at the Ellipse like any other spectator.
Garland, in his remarks today, also addressed what he sees as broader threats to democracy, including attacks against judges, police, and journalists, and also legislative enactments that make it harder for millions of Americans to vote. He notes that most of those legislative efforts came following the big lie that the election was stolen. Wolf.
All right, Paula, thank you very much. Paula Reed reporting. Let's discuss this and more with Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's a key member of the January 6th Select Committee. He's also the author of a very timely brand new book. There you see the cover, entitled Unthinkable: Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much for writing this book. I want to get to all the news in just a moment, but let me start by once again expressing my deepest condolences to you and your family for the loss of your son, Tommy. You buried him, I know, a year ago today, and you write about him in your new book. First of all, how are you doing, and how would you like him to be remembered on this day?
Well, thank you for asking, Wolf. Thank you for having me. We are hanging tough as a family, and we have great friends, and we have great neighbors and wonderful constituents of mine here in Maryland's 8th District. So we're doing okay, and we're able to talk about Tommy without dissolving into tears and agony. But we want him to be remembered as a beautiful young man with a perfect heart who loved this world and wanted nothing but the best for the people of this world. And he, of course, succumbed to depression, but he hoped for a world that would get beyond fascism and beyond hunger and beyond war. He was really like a messenger from the future who came to talk to us about what life could be like. So he expected a lot more from American democracy, not a lot less from it.
Yeah, and as we say, may his memory be a blessing. Let's discuss what's going on right now. You're a key member of the January 6th Select Committee. Let me ask you about Stephanie Grisham, the former Trump press secretary's meeting with the committee tonight, which comes as a result of your encouraging her to come in. Why is her insight, Congressman, into what happened on January 6th so important?
Well, we're trying to fill in the picture, and there were a lot of people like Stephanie Grisham who were aware of what was happening, who tried to move events in a more positive and less dangerous direction. And everybody's part of this jigsaw puzzle. So she was very good the way that most of the witnesses are being about coming forward and saying, of course, they will render truthful, honest testimony, as the Supreme Court has said everybody's got to do when Congress comes calling or a court comes calling. This is a civic and legal duty. And also, as most people see it, it's an honor to be able to serve the country in this way, because we've got to fortify the institutions of democracy against violent insurrection and authoritarian attacks from the outside.
And if we don't learn exactly what happened, we're bound to repeat that horrible situation. That's why what you and the Select Committee are doing are so important. We learned yesterday, Congressman, that the committee also wants to speak with Sean Hannity of Fox about his interactions with the former president, both before and after January 6th. Will the committee subpoena him if he does not come in voluntarily?
Well, we haven't made that decision yet, but you know, if two people are crossing the street and one is a truck driver and one is a news commentator, and they see a car accident and they are fact witnesses to an event and they're subpoenaed to come in, both of them have to come in. There's no general exception from having to render truthful testimony that goes to members of the press or to politicians or to friends of powerful people. Under the rule of law, everybody's got to testify. That's how we make due process work, and that's how the justice system operates.
What about the former Vice President Mike Pence, who the Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson says the committee also wants to talk to? Is the committee prepared to subpoena him if necessary?
Again, we haven't made that decision. Vice President Pence was a hero and a constitutional patriot on January 6th itself, when he properly executed the duties of the vice president, despite a massive pressure campaign being leveled against him by Donald Trump and his acolytes to try to force Pence to declare unknown powers of the vice president simply to nullify electoral college votes from the states. So he did the right thing. Since then, of course, he has tried to curry favor with the president and his political forces, and he's got every right to do that. But he doesn't have a right not to render truthful and honest testimony, and I'm certain that he will recognize his legal duty and his constitutional obligation to come and tell us everything that happened with truth and with honesty.
We'll see how that unfolds. In your new book, Unthinkable, which I have gone through, it's really
Across the KELO land region, the colder air is coming in tonight, aided by the fact we have that northwest wind. Now, here's a look at the current wind speeds. Again, there have been some higher gusts, though not quite in the league of last night, but 20+ mile-per-hour winds, along with the single-digit temperatures. It all equals those wind chills. And here's what that looks like right now: -10 to -20, or even more. Western South Dakota Rapid City right now, wind chill -34. It's cold out there. Just don't expose your skin into the oncoming northwest wind. Should be okay. The just plain cold air, that's going to remain tonight. Now, here's a look at the cloud cover we have. Really about the only place we have clouds is southwestern and south central South Dakota. Might even be a couple flurries out there in the western part of South Dakota. But we're just going to be seeing those clouds pass through the area tonight. It's
your clue. FTD.
However, facing increasing pressure to also go after former President Trump and his allies, who stoked his supporters with false claims of election fraud that led to the deadly Capitol attack.
The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6 perpetrators at any level accountable under law.
The House Select Committee also investigating the insurrection, requesting Fox host Sean Hannity to share his detailed knowledge regarding Trump's state of mind during the riot. The panel says text messages show Hannity was concerned even days before the attack, allegedly texting former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, quote, "I'm very worried about the next 48 hours. Hannity's lawyers have not yet formally responded to the committee, but more Trump allies were sharing their firsthand accounts of his actions as the mob stormed the Capitol building. Stephanie Grisham, one of Trump's longest-serving senior aides, who quit her job in the White House citing the insurrection, now sitting down for an interview with the panel. Grisham has been criticized for spreading lies during the Trump administration, but recently said this about her former boss.
I am terrified of him running for president in 2024. I don't think he is fit for the job.
And Liz Cheney, the highest-ranking Republican on the committee, has also said as much. The panel hasn't ruled out a criminal referral to the DOJ if it finds Trump committed any crimes related to January 6. In Washington, Faith Abube, ABC News.
Another cold day in our neck of the woods. The wind came up, boy did it, and those wind chills, well, they fell down. Phil's First Alert Forecast. That's when we come back here on KSFY.
The only news in prime time.
An issue at a moment where we are seeing workforce shortages and we are seeing deep challenges in the childcare sector caused by the pandemic, but really challenges that
the investments in cybersecurity, and I think, and I would like to keep management of this with the EPA. They're responsible for all the other elements of water, and they do work on the cleanliness, on the lead pipe abatement, and the purity of the water. They do a lot of great work there at EPA. They
getting along okay, but the food is pretty lousy most of the time. The post office is uncertain where the letter has been all these years, but it was finally delivered to the sergeant's 90-year-old widow, Angelina. She said, "It's like he came back to me, his handwriting and everything." That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We will be right back.
To try to fill in some of the gaps that they have around Trump's state of mind, Trump's frame of reference, what he was thinking, what he was considering doing, what he didn't do in those hours where he was silent, and paint that picture. And that's critical, especially as they come up to the more public phase of their hearings in the next coming months.
Maya?
Co-signing. And let me just say, and want to point one thing out very specifically that we have seen in the request for Sean Hannity, which is we have reason to believe you talked directly to Donald Trump in advance of January 6th. We're not talking about, I think the letter makes very clear, they're not asking Sean Hannity, tell us what your sources told you, tell us who your sources are, the types of things that typically protect journalists from these kinds of investigations. This is not that. This is Sean Hannity as a fact witness, not behaving as a reporter, but behaving as someone who is part of the team. He's saying, look, y'all, I'm here on the team. I'm worried. What are we doing? Here's my advice to you. This is the exact same kind of thing that got Chris Cuomo off the air on CNN when he was helping his brother, governor of New York at the time, Cuomo, with his legal troubles. So just remember that. This is not an instance in terms of how the committee has framed its request of Sean Hannity that is implicating him as a journalist. It's implicating him as a fact witness.
Right. That's an incisive legal point, as we've come to expect from Maya. And then, Juanita, I turn that piece of toast over because I think she's fully toasted that side of it for you to hit the media political side, which is one of the great problems we have in society is the normalizing of the bad decline of so many things and institutions. And I respect, I just said, I talked about the First Amendment rights over at that program, and I respect their rights to say and believe whatever they want. I think that's a great part of America. But speak to the political and media expectations, Juanita, that Maya just diagnosed, which is the text suggests an individual over there who is lobbying, quarterbacking, and running government policy for Donald Trump from his perch.
And it was no secret that Trump would call Hannity regularly, because what we know is that Trump wants to make sure that his appeal to the masses is firm. He wants to make sure he stays in their good graces. So he would call Hannity for advice throughout his presidency. And it just so happens that this last series of calls, the most recent series of calls around January 6th, is what is ultimately going to be damning for Hannity to have played a role in helping to essentially facilitate a coup to some degree, try to back it down. But the reality is that we're likely to see this continue in the future. I think we've seen all the calls across the internet saying that we shouldn't call that channel even news, considering that they don't actually do reporting. As Hannity said, he's not a reporter, he's not a journalist. But in this role, what they're unveiling is this direct line, not only to the White House in the Trump presidency, but to other elected officials that we know they're leveraging and abusing a mass media outlet in order to communicate lies and communicate to a base that will eat it up. They eat it up every single day. And we also know that base will act on it and act on it violently, as we saw on January 6th.
Right, and that goes to normalizing that. It matters to society for the reasons you both have so expertly stated. And it also matters, by the way, to people who rely on Mr. Hannity for information and news. He's in the news, and the one place you can't find out about it as of last night is on Mr. Hannity's program. Juanita and Maya, thanks to both of you. A lot of food for thought. Coming up, what Maya mentioned at the top of the broadcast. Later, we will get into the fallout from a Trump ally basically admitting the coup prep on live TV. Also, there's some good news on what science is saying about aspects of Omicron. Dr. Howard Dean is here live. Stay with us.
That may occur. Tell your doctor about an infection or symptoms, or if you've had a
Indeed.com/hire.
What's my safe flight story?
Every time. Here.
I wish the CDC would just come out and say, hey, we don't have enough tests. We really should have enough tests, and then you can test your way out of isolation.
Instead, the CDC issuing updated guidance suggesting that people in isolation who have access to a test could test after 5 days. If positive, then isolate for 5 more days. But the CDC says if you don't test after 5 days of isolation, then just wear a mask for 5 more days.
So if there were an overly abundant supply of rapid tests, I think we'd be approaching this differently. You know, we might all be getting up in the morning and doing our rapid test before going to work, before sending our kids off to school. And if they're negative, we're out and about feeling better.
96% of schools across the country are open, according to the White House, which is urging schools to stay open and to use billions of federal dollars to keep students safe. But in Chicago, the nation's third largest district, there's no school today, virtual or in person, for more than 340,000 students. The teachers' union voting to go remote, the district canceling all classes in response.
Let me remind you about what the consequences of moving an entire urban district to remote learning are. And we simply can't ignore the realities of the history that we experienced through 2020 and 2021.
Amid a critical shortage of tests, new federal test sites are set to open in 6 states. The $500 million free at-home kits promised by the Biden administration delayed. As new COVID cases now average over 500,000 daily, and they're climbing fast. And hospitalizations are surpassing the Delta peak last September and approaching an all-time high set last January.
The sheer volume of the number of cases that may be of reduced severity but could still stress our hospital system.
And Wolf, the list of COVID-related cancellations grows longer every day. The Grammy Awards show now postponed with no new date set. The organizers saying there's simply too much uncertainty around the Omicron variant, and the whole thing just comes with too much risk right now.
Yeah,
Wolf.
second year in a row for that. All right, Alexandra Field in New York, thank you very much. Let's bring in our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, as well as the president of the American Medical Association, Dr. Gerald Harmon. Doctors, thank you, both of you, for joining us. Sanjay, let me start with the breaking news. CDC vaccine advisors just a little while ago recommending expanding boosters for Americans as young as 12 years old. Sanjay, how significant is this development?
Well, you know, on a personal note, I have 2 children that fall into that category, so they'll be getting their booster shots. My older daughter already got hers; she's 16. So, you know, I think it'll make a difference for people who qualify. Here's the issue, Wolf. I think we're talking overall in the country about 5% of the population, and of that 5%, these are people between the ages of 12 and 15. Only about half have already gotten their first 2 shots. So, you know, it's a relatively small percentage that we're talking about that are going to be impacted by this. So it's good for them, you know, to be able to get this added protection. But the real problem still, Wolf, whether it's children or adults, is still primarily the unvaccinated. This is giving another layer of protection to people who already have pretty good protection. That's good, that's important. But when you look at the numbers on the right side of the screen in terms of the hospitalizations in particular, those are primarily people who are unvaccinated completely, Wolf.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Dr. Harmon, let me ask you about the new isolation guidance we've received from the CDC. You say it's, and I'm quoting you now, confusing and counterproductive. So what are they getting wrong?
Well, it's a good point, Wolf. And to your point, what we at the AMA have is a concern that if you're going to end a period of isolation after an active COVID infection, it'd be nice to have, in fact, we would recommend a valid negative COVID test, an antigen test, a rapid test, in order to ensure that you're no longer shedding the virus, no longer transmissible, and you tend to validate that you're not contagious before you go back into your workforce, your family, and potentially spread the virus even more.
Yeah, I think that's significant as well. You know, Sanjay, you have a new essay on this issue coming out soon on CNN.com about how the CDC...
Important to help reduce your risk of fracture with Pro.
Attention Macy's shoppers, the realtor is opening an hour later and closing an hour earlier. Macy's stores will now open at 11 and close at 8. Company officials say they are preparing for a potential increase in COVID-19 cases among workers. They expect the new hours to last throughout January. The change only applies to Monday through Thursday.
After nearly a century at the top, General Motors is no longer the leader in U.S. auto sales. Toyota taking the top spot for the very first time. Toyota sold 2.3 million vehicles in the U.S. last year compared to GM's 2.2 million. Ford sold 1.7 million vehicles through November of last year. One big reason for the change at the top was the shortage of semiconductor chips, which caused sporadic production by General Motors. This is the first time since 1931 that an American car company hasn't claimed the top spot. One lucky person could make history with Powerball tonight. That jackpot now worth an estimated $630 million. That's Powerball's 7th largest jackpot ever. It's been 3 months and 39 drawings since someone won a Powerball jackpot.
Well, we aren't really hitting the jackpot with this forecast. Phil's got a final check of it coming up right after this.
Keep up with all the
win. And this is a live look at Tokyo from Earth TV. The big story there tonight, the New Year's first tuna auction at a fish market in Tokyo. The top bid at the event was a bluefin tuna weighing in at roughly 465 pounds. A sushi chain bought the fish for just north of $145,000. It's a lot of tuna. Just some other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
When the beautifully made is out.
A container that they've scraped off some of the drug of abuse into and add water. And once they do that, if the fentanyl test strip is positive, it indicates that fentanyl is contained in that particular drug they're going to ingest. And by the way, stay away from it because it can lead to death very, very quickly, as you've described.
Right. We're looking now at a picture of a penny, and then what you see, the little powdery substance next to it there, is the amount of fentanyl it takes to kill. Correct me if I'm wrong here, doctor, but from what I understand, if someone takes a drug with fentanyl in it, particularly if they've never been exposed to fentanyl, it's not a question of whether, but they will overdose. Is that right?
Well, I mean, yes, likely. The answer is yes, likely they will overdose because you just need small amounts of fentanyl injected intranasally or intravenously, especially, to kill you. And it kills you because it stops your breathing. And it can do so in a matter of minutes. So you can imagine if you're ingesting heroin that's been laced with fentanyl, you know, the chances that you're going to die are astronomical.
Well, I understand the value of what we were talking about with the test strip. You could also make the case that, you know, Narcan has been invaluable because it has saved, I'm guessing, hundreds of lives from overdoses. But it does beg the question of the bigger problem that people are still doing drugs that they don't even realize could kill them, I guess.
That's right. I mean, so a lot of people who are using these substances don't know that they're laced with fentanyl. First of all, so they may purchase oxycodone on the street, they may purchase a benzodiazepine on the street and not realize that those drugs are being laced with fentanyl. And as we said, fentanyl is lethal, it's extremely potent, and it can lead to death very quickly. Now, you mentioned Narcan. Narcan is key. I don't think we have enough availability of Narcan throughout the states yet, or we don't have enough information disseminated to people about the value of Narcan because it saves lives, no question. All you have to do is inject it intranasally. It's a spray, and it can save your life until you can get to the hospital.
What does it say to you, doctor, that this hasn't, I guess, in a way, halted the drug problem? I mean, people aren't worried or at least thinking about the fact that what they're about to do in the form of a drug could kill them, and they're still doing it.
That's right. They're not. You know, I think we've seen a lot of stress, emotional stress, economic stress related to the pandemic that continues today. So we've seen a lot of people in recovery relapse, and we've seen people who otherwise did not have a substance use disorder start using drugs of abuse, that is, these mind and mood altering substances, to cope with the stresses of COVID-19.
How do we improve this, doctor? What do you see ahead?
Well, I think number one, it's important for people to realize that there are two good resources here. One is the American Psychological Association that has a website and a locator for physicians, other healthcare practitioners for mental health. Two, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a website. It has an 800 number for support services. Take advantage of them.
One more quick question before you go.
Laundry. We can do.
Trucks piling up in the Sioux Falls U-Haul.
We've had to use second parking lots just because so much equipment's coming into town. Other places like California, I know they're getting really short on equipment.
We actually had to rent a U-Haul over here in Sioux Falls, drive it all the way back to Los Angeles, put all the stuff in it, and then come back.
A lot of driving. How the rapid increase in moves to South Dakota is impacting the moving industry all over the country in tonight's Your Money Matters at 10.
The use of South Dakota state parks and recreation areas reached new highs in 2021, while more non-resident hunters were back in the fields in pursuit of pheasants. South Dakota Game Fish and Parks officials say nearly 395,000 camping units were used last year. Visitation also hit records totaling more than 8.5 million.
KELOLAND's Bob Mercer has a closer look at all of the numbers. You can find his full report on the Capitol News Bureau page on KELOLAND.com.
And finally, the fifth thing, it has been 14 months since a Sioux Falls man opened a restaurant in the middle of a pandemic. We check in with Gabriel Rivero, the owner of Tarquin Argentinian Restaurant, about what it's been like. In tonight's Eye on KELOLAND, we'll find out what gangster Al Capone has to do with the future of the restaurant.
Very interesting. Well, let's get one final check of our weather with Chief Meteorologist Jay Trobeck.
All right, it is going to be cold tomorrow. The winds will die down, but a high of just 1 in Sioux Falls and a high of 7 below in Aberdeen.
That's it for us.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Tonight, we're following several breaking news stories. A CDC panel recommends boosters for teens. Plus, what's happening in America's schools? Hundreds of thousands of kids are out of the classroom. The struggle for parents, teachers, and children. The post-holiday surge leads school districts nationwide to cancel in-person learning. Tonight, the union battle in the nation's third largest district.
When our district was fully remote, our children suffered.
And Omicron postpones music's biggest night, the Grammys, as cases surge nationwide. Philadelphia's deadliest fire in a century. 13 people killed, including 7 children.
This is, without a doubt, one of the most tragic days in our city's history.
Did a Christmas tree start the blaze? Winter weather from coast to coast. More than 82 million Americans under alerts. The unsolved mystery of January 6th, the hunt for the pipe bomber, as officials say extremism is on the rise. Plus, what President Biden will say about Donald Trump's role in the riot. Kim Jong-un's missile launch. North Korea claims it was a hypersonic missile. How far the weapon could go. The breaking news tonight, the world's #1 tennis player kicked out of Australia. Why officials say the visa for Novak Djokovic was canceled. And the unlikely duo bridging the gap between 2 cities in the north and south. Our story tonight about unifying America.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin tonight with breaking news. A key CDC advisory panel is recommending COVID-19 boosters for younger teens. That means that nearly 5 million kids could be eligible for a 3rd dose of the Pfizer shot as early as tomorrow. But for many parents, that booster couldn't come soon enough as the Omicron COVID surge is shattering records across the U.S. Cases are up in nearly every state. And the CDC said the 7-day average of daily cases is up 98% from the previous week. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez is in Miami, Florida, where cases have almost doubled in the last week. Good evening, Manny.
Good evening, Nora. Across the country, demand for testing remains high. And here in Miami-Dade County, well, it now has the 2nd highest rate of new infections in the nation as the virus continues to disrupt lives. Tonight, Omicron's impact continues to be felt nationwide. The upcoming Grammy Awards are now postponed indefinitely after organizers said there were too many risks. The awards were scheduled to air on CBS at the end of this month.
Good morning, everyone.
There's news out of the CDC today. Children ages 12 to 15 could be eligible as soon as tomorrow to receive a booster of the Pfizer vaccine if it's been 5 months after their 2nd dose.
He was following me and then panned down to his gun and said that he had something for me.
Congresswoman Torres' office now tells us that direct threats against her like that one have ramped down since last summer, but they say that she's still getting near constant online harassment related to her work on immigration. Now, as for any possible threats to the Capitol here tomorrow on the anniversary, the chief tells us there are no major red flags at the moment, but they are keeping an eye on a protest vigil that is expected tomorrow at the nearby D.C. jail connected to people who are being held in relation to January 6th. Wolf.
All right, we'll have extensive coverage of all this, all the events tomorrow. Brian Todd, thank you very much. Let's discuss right now with the former D.C. police officer Michael Fanone, who was dragged and beaten by rioters while defending the U.S. Capitol back on January 6th. He's now a CNN law enforcement analyst. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. We're looking at some video. I want to show our viewers some video right now of you being attacked by the insurrectionists back on January 6th, a year ago. How are you doing now, 1 year later?
I don't know. I've got mixed emotions. I mean, physically, psychologically, I think I'm doing 100% better than I was, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, and obviously a year ago. But I mean, this week has proven to be difficult.
Totally understandable. You say Capitol Police, and you know many of them, are still experiencing what you call a crisis of leadership. Exactly who are you talking about?
I'm talking about command level officials. Not all of them, but quite a few. There was a complete and total breakdown and failure amongst the executive level leadership within the United States Capitol Police. And that's something that I witnessed firsthand, and it has not been addressed. I continue to speak to many of my brothers and sisters at the United States Capitol Police, and they've expressed to me the reality that they don't have confidence in their leadership.
Yeah, that's a serious problem, obviously. You just heard our Brian Todd report, Michael, that at least 130 officers have either retired or left the department since January 6th of last year. Can the department be effective when they're actually losing so many police officers?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I understand the difficulty of Chief Manger's job now post January 6th. And I think it would be incredibly difficult for him to come out and say that his department was not prepared. But I find it incredibly difficult to believe that their department is prepared, much like any department would be prepared, for a situation like January 6th when you're dealing with staff shortages at that extreme level.
Yeah, that's important. Michael Fanone, thanks so much for joining us. We'll discuss much more on all of this certainly tomorrow and in the days ahead. Just ahead.
Alerts from Washington State all the way to the East Coast. Heavy snow coming down in Minneapolis today, and here in the New York City area, hundreds of accidents reported on icy roads this morning. A 35-car pileup in Westchester County. Now the next storm set to hit D.C., Philadelphia, and New York. Let's get right to senior meteorologist Rob Marciano tracking it all for us. Hey, Rob.
Hey, David, it was a messy start today, and we've got another couple of systems to get through. Here they are on the map. The one that's coming through tonight, that was going to bring the cold air that will bring brutal wind chills into places like Chicago, St. Louis, and Indianapolis tomorrow. But that low in Denver quickly swings through the southeast tomorrow. It'll be snowing in places like Nashville and up through West Virginia by tomorrow, this time tomorrow night. Then into the New York City area. I-95 is going to see it from D.C. to New York all the way to Boston. Anywhere from 2 to 6 inches of snow come Friday morning. That'll be slick. David?
Rob Marciano with us tonight. Thanks, Rob. Tomorrow, this nation will mark 1 year since the attack on the Capitol. And tonight, news from the Attorney General Merrick Garland, who said today when it comes to investigating those responsible, he vowed to hold people accountable, quote, at any level. Tonight, right here, 3 of the officers who came under attack, sitting down with me 1 year later. What they ask of their fellow Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They're warning right here tonight about what they believe could still happen in this country. And what they said when I asked about accountability and the former president.
This is the first time that all 3 of you have sat down for an interview since you testified? Yes. Correct. Nearly a year later, do you all still live this?
Yes, every single day. The way I sleep, eating breakfast, making sure I don't hurt myself, putting my shirt on, the phone calls from the Justice Department, from the FBI, asking for, do I recognize this individual. I had 2 surgeries already. It hasn't been easy.
I think it's just as simple as I work in the crime scene, you know? Going to work at the Capitol every day, it's a constant reminder of, you know, what happened. I return to the crime scene every single day.
You have talked about what you saw, what you heard that day.
Everybody knows what happened. And if you disagree with what happened, then I don't know what to tell you, because we watched, the world watched this attack. I've got to the point where I've stopped trying to convince people about what happened. Now I want accountability for what did happen, so.
You talked about the racial slurs, saying it was the first time anyone had ever hurled a slur at you while wearing the uniform.
Yeah. You know, it's so much that happened that day. There's still so much horror and trauma that happened that day to a white guy and a Dominican guy.
Do you remember that moment?
Sure.
When it was finally over with, and you were sitting on the floor at the Capitol, and you turned to your friend and you asked that question?
Is this America? How could something like that happen? You know, at the U.S. Capitol, the pinnacle of democracy.
Sergeant Cannell, you were beaten with a flagpole. You had chemicals sprayed at you, so much of it that it soaked your clothes right through to your skin. And you've said there were moments when you actually thought you were going to die.
Yes. I struggled because I was getting pulled. I didn't want to get pulled to a crowd. They were pulling me by my leg, by my shield, by my shoulder strap. And we don't know what those people had in those bags. There was nothing I could do because I couldn't even move my arms. I thought to myself that I wouldn't make it out of there alive.
You thought your life was in greater danger in those moments than during your entire deployment in Iraq?
Yes, sir.
What were they saying to you?
What were they not saying?
Traitor.
Traitor. Join us. You breaking your oath.
Some of them were showing badges.
That happened with me. At the moment, like like, what the hell? It's a badge?
I did see people with military paraphernalia, veterans, Army for Trump, veteran for Trump.
I know you finally got home 4 a.m.
Yes.
And your wife wanted to give you a hug.
She did, and it pains me. And all she wanted to do was hug me because she had been watching TV since it started. And I knew that if I would have hugged her, then all those chemicals would have transferred to her. And she put a blanket and decided to hug her. And when I did that, I was crying like for about 10 minutes. I didn't say much, just cry in her arms. Then I went to see my son and I cried some more.
Officer Hodges, you described what people were wearing that day. You said ballistic vests, helmets, goggles, military face masks.
You know, they weren't just there to listen to people speak. And there wasn't just a rally. They were ready for violence. That's what they had planned on. It was premeditated. They had a plan of action. And, you know, as we saw, they followed through with it.
The country, the world now knows that moment in the doorway. Can you still see and hear the voices, and in particular that man who was standing across from you?
Oh, absolutely. Because of the way I was being crushed, I literally could not look at him. So I remember just the intensity of his guttural screams, and I swear I remember him foaming at the mouth and just grabbing at my mask and ripping it off my head, straining my neck, ripping away my baton, beating me in the head with it.
You said at one point he had his cell phone in his mouth, so he could use both hands to get at you?
Yeah, it was just the absolute zealotry of these people was unreal. They were completely convinced that, without any evidence whatsoever, that the election was stolen and that they were doing the right thing. They were in that cult of personality. Their leader had told them what to do and they were going to do it.
What were you thinking?
I remember, so the way that I was pinned was that I had the door to my right, and then just a crush of people and a shield on my left, to where my arms were like this. And I was standing pretty much straight up. So I couldn't get any strength from my legs in that posture, and I couldn't effectively use my hands.
Did you think you were going to get through that?
I mean, it crossed my mind at the time that, this might be it.
A Texas man has now been arrested and indicted for that moment in the doorway. And I'm curious.
Good.
Honestly, it had been so long since the 6th that I didn't think they were going to find him. They were able to track him down and arrest him, so he's going to face justice one way or another.
I know all three of you have witnessed how politicized this has all become, and I'm not interested in talking about the daily political back and forth, but some of these moments are difficult to ignore. You had a congressman from Georgia, Andrew Clyde, who said, if you didn't know the TV footage was video from January 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
Yeah. I'm not sure if he had watched when Hodges was screaming, when I was fighting for my life. I had the injuries. I could show it to him if he wants to, if he would like to.
You've lost service members, and you've lost several to suicide.
Yeah, that's tough.
Do you think there's been a lot of quiet suffering?
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of mental health awareness, and it needs to be checked. And I just make that plea to people, get help, it's okay.
As we mark this 1-year mark, do you feel safer?
Those individuals who were there, they thought that they were in the right, and they would stop at nothing because they were empowered by somebody in the highest position of power in the United States.
That person in power, former President Trump.
Yes. Correct.
What would you say, not to Republicans or Democrats or independents on this 1-year mark, what would you say to your fellow Americans about why that day should be remembered?
People have this conception of American democracy being invincible, that something like what happened on January 6th couldn't happen.
It did happen.
And it did happen.
You believe it's possible we see something like that again?
Oh, 100%.
Yes.
You all still want accountability for anyone who helped plan this?
Yes,
Absolutely.
I almost lost my life multiple times because of that day.
What does accountability mean to you?
For these people who attack us, who attack me, the planning, from the planning, financing, everything that needs to be investigated. I mean,
when you look back at that rally that morning and the former president?
Yes, I do hold him accountable. He's the only person who had influence over those people, and you could give him the benefit of the doubt that he was not involved. You could say that he didn't know for about an hour. What did he do in the hours after the first hour? You can't tell me that he did not know. And that event, I'm sure that was playing on all the TV at that time for several hours. So the notion that he did not know or he acted swiftly, no, I don't buy that.
I just have to hope that, they're doing everything they can to see that the people in power get what they deserve.
And if that means the former president?
Absolutely. I don't care who it means. You've got to deal with this harshly and quickly in order to squash any thoughts of this happening again, which I guarantee you people are imagining this happening again.
Right now.
Yeah. Right now.
Those officers pushing for accountability, warning that without it, this could happen again. I want to bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, tonight at the Justice Department. Pierre, we both heard what the Attorney General said today, vowing to go after those responsible for January 6th at every level, were his words. This Attorney General, we know, facing pressure from many who say this investigation should not just be about the people who showed up, but about the people who planned this, who encouraged this. And of course, questions do remain about the former president. The AG carefully choosing his words today.
David, it was clear from his speech today that this investigation is far from over. He said, quote, "The actions we have taken thus far will not be our last." And he made clear he's not just going after people at the scene, but anyone who was criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy. He did not mention former President Trump by name, but made a point of saying we will follow the facts wherever they may lead. David?
Pierre Thomas, live at the Justice Department. Pierre, thank you. We will have much more of our interview with the officers later tonight on Nightline and their message to their fellow officers who...
Days. Cold coming on?
Forced to stay in the Melbourne airport for 12 hours. He was hoping to play in the Australian Open, which begins later this month. Djokovic is opposed to vaccinations. He was granted an exemption by tournament officials, but Australia's prime minister says Djokovic's visa was canceled, and he said no one is above his country's COVID rules. All right, Louisiana's governor today issued a pardon for Homer Plessy, the black man whose arrest for refusing to leave a whites-only railroad car led to the Supreme Court ruling that cemented separate but equal into U.S. law for half a century. 126 years after that ruling, Governor John Bel Edwards said he was beyond grateful to help restore Plessy's legacy. And tonight, we want to highlight an act of kindness during that epic traffic jam on the I-95 in Virginia the other day. A couple trapped in their car called the owner of a bread truck that was also stuck on the highway, asking for food. Well, the bakery owner instructed the driver to give away all of the bread and rolls that he was shipping. The couple went car to car, delivering and breaking bread with others stranded in the storm. Isn't that nice? All right, coming up next, turning the divided states back into the United States, one newspaper column at a time.
Number one. From Charleston to Pittsburgh, you've seen the normalization of extremism in this country. You've seen the rise of anti-Semitism in this country. You've seen the kind of racism and polarization on the ground floor that's deeply scary. So in a world in which we see rising extremism on the far right and politicians who excuse it, and a kind of increasing illiberalism from the far left, and again, politicians who excuse it, that leaves all of us in really tough shape.
In your new book, you write, and I'm quoting now, you write, "Our society is becoming more vulnerable by the day to hate on both the left and the right." You say both our government and all of us as individuals have a role to play in stopping all this hate that's exploding out there. Tell us how we do that.
Well, look, I think this is really important. There's no silver bullet that will stop the rise of hate, or that even will prevent us from tearing the social fabric. Wolf, this is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and we need an all-of-society strategy to tackle it. This is the reason why I wrote the book. It's filled with ADL strategies and tactics and tips based on what we've seen after 100 years of fighting hate. And it lays out a blueprint. So what can citizens do? What can businesses do? What can faith leaders do? What can parents and teachers do? And let me just give you a quick couple examples. Number one, we've got to speak out when hate happens, even when it originates on our side of the aisle, so to speak. Right? We need conservatives to call it out and liberals to call it out. Number two, Wolf, we've got to cancel culture. No, we've got to lose the litmus tests. My Jewish faith tells me everyone can be redeemed. Everyone has an opportunity to amend for their errors. And number three, Wolf, I really think we've talked about in your show before, social media. We've really got to curb the excesses and the algorithms that are literally engineered to inflame people. That's got to be corrected once and for all.
Those are such important points, and I'm so glad you wrote this really important book. It could happen here. The title is so scary, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. Jonathan Greenblatt, thanks for writing the book. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Yeah, we're going to have much more news just ahead, including an update on a deadly row house fire in Philadelphia that killed at least 13 people, including 7 children. Stand by for details.
9.
And good evening, everyone.
Gestures and pointing, so no one can tell I'm unsure about my
form. And the Freedom to Vote Act is important to our democracy. January 6th was not an isolated event.
It is beyond distasteful for some of our colleagues to ham-fistedly invoke the January 6th anniversary to advance these aims. Their first draft of the legislation at hand was introduced in January of 2019.
Byron.
Well, the thing they want to do right now is kill the filibuster, and they'll use any argument that is at hand. And 2 years ago, long before January 6th, they had other arguments to want to get rid of the filibuster. Now they're saying January 6th. As far as Merrick Garland is concerned, I said earlier that Joe Biden was pleading for time on COVID. Well, Garland is pleading for time on the January 6th investigations because he came out today and said, look, just because we've leveled a relatively limited indictment against Figure A or Figure B, that doesn't mean we're not going to indict them again with something bigger. Just wait, please. We'll take care of it. He's under a lot of pressure from Democrats.
Leslie?
I would agree with both guys on this. You got to be patient. You have over 14,000 hours of videotape. You have 700 people arrested. Approximately half of those are guilty. Approximately half of those have been sentenced already. But you have a lot of people out there. They say approximately 1,000 assaults and could be up to 2,500 people that will be arrested at the end of the day. And also, the Attorney General said, quote, actions taken thus far will not be our last. So I believe he will take this as far as it needs to be. And that means perhaps sitting congressional members or even perhaps a former president.
Well, we'll have full coverage of everything tomorrow, the day, the one-year anniversary. Panel, thank you very much. When we come back, an inspiring comeback in the making.
They're so scared of the dark money issue that they're actually falsely accusing us of being the defenders of dark money when they are. Another signal that this is their pain point. And I think if we apply a lot more pressure on that pain point, we might be able to garner some forward motion here.
Yeah, you've worked on that issue a long time. One of the first bills Speaker Pelosi passed on the House side is the For the People Act, which deals with some of the campaign finance issues. And as you say, that's one more thing that's held up by the filibuster. I don't know if it'd be helpful, but here on behalf of the Beat, Senator, if you want to bring Joe Manchin here to have a public discussion, we could call it anything. We could call it an interview. We could call it a group therapy for closure of whatever that is. We'd be interested in all of the answers, sir.
When we have something to tell you, I will be the happiest senator.
All right, fair enough. That's how the news is sometimes. Senator Whitehouse, thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Ray loves
partner. Just imagine, what would you do if you won the grand prize of $25,000?
Above freezing on Saturday, and even next week, looking to stay very mild and very dry as well.
In the meantime, clear out that freezer and use the outdoors. You don't have to use any of that freezer space. Tyler, thank you. Appreciate your time here at 5:30. Les will join you next on NEWSNATION News.
Sam Wright finding the silver lining. We will see you in 2 minutes at 6 o'clock on KSFY. Good night.
With 6 crunchy beef tacos plus a pound of heart valve or abnormal bleeding. While taking, you may bruise more.
I'm going.
Borders, Germany and this administration seems dead set on handing Putin another point of leverage, and that is Nord Stream 2.
Repeatedly refuted by the law enforcement and intelligence agencies of both the last administration and this one, as well as by every court, federal and state, that has considered them. The Department of Justice will continue to do all it can to protect voting rights with the enforcement powers we have. It is essential that Congress act to give the department the powers we need to ensure that every eligible voter can cast a vote that counts. But as with violence and threats of violence, the Justice Department, even the Congress, cannot alone defend the right to vote. The responsibility to preserve democracy and to maintain faith in the legitimacy of its essential processes lies with every elected official and with every American. All Americans are entitled to free, fair, and secure elections that ensure they can select the representatives of their choice. All Americans are entitled to live in a country in which their public servants can go about their jobs of serving the public free from violence and unlawful threats of violence. And all Americans are entitled to live in a country in which the transition from one elected administration to the next is accomplished peacefully.
Yes, and we're talking
Nashville's famous hot chicken.
Hear the spicy story behind the sauce. Next we'll
see you at 6:30 on KSFY.
Right after Dakota News Now.
Late Night Laughs is your source for side-splitting comedy. Every weeknight, starting at 10, with Last Man Standing.
Mike, do not.
I'm here and do it.
No.
Followed by Modern Family.
I got Boo Boo Bear from the freezer.
Why do you have chocolate on your face?
It was under a pie.
Mike and Molly.
Why are you so tall?
Why are you so handsome?
And The Simpsons.
Seriously.
I know.
With Late Night Laughs, only on Fox Sioux Falls.
2.5 Men, now in 2.5D, with 2.5 times the delights and 2.5 times the dummies.
That's what she said.
2.5 Men.
Weeknights on Fox Sioux Falls.
Investigate TV tackles the top topics.
Go to News Now.
Powerful, held accountable with in-depth journalism led by award-winning journalist Lee Zurich. Download Investigate TV for your Roku and Amazon Fire devices.
Breaking news tonight, the CDC panel backing boosters for more children as more schools close due to Omicron. CDC advisors voting a short time ago to recommend boosters for 12 to 15-year-olds as Omicron surges. U.S. COVID cases doubling in a week to nearly 500,000 a day. Chicago, the nation's third largest school district, shut down, teachers refusing to enter the classroom. The CDC under fire for confusion over testing and isolation guidelines, what the agency's director said today, and Omicron now impacting music's biggest night, the Grammys. Also this evening, the deadly fire ripping through a Philadelphia row house, at least 13 killed, including 7 children. What officials said about the smoke detectors. The double winter storm threat, blizzard conditions in the Midwest, the East Coast at risk after that highway nightmare. Al Roker tracking it all. The eve of the 1-year anniversary of the Capitol riot, our exclusive inside the investigation. The rioters the FBI is still searching for. The world's top tennis star turned away from Australia, his visa canceled, the battle over his vaccination status. And inside the Super Bowl of gadgets, how the pandemic is ushering a new era of personalized tech.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everyone. We're here ahead of tomorrow's solemn observances of the 1-year anniversary of the attack on the Capitol. Tonight, we'll take you inside a still very active investigation. But we want to start with that other calamity that just won't leave us, COVID. Breaking tonight, the CDC panel recommending booster shots for kids 12 to 15. That's welcome news. At the same time, the CDC finds itself facing backlash over some of its other recommendations concerning how long those who have tested positive for COVID should isolate, and whether a negative test should be required to end that isolation. Some wondering whether some of the decisions at the agency are being driven by science or by the shortage of rapid test kits. Tom Costello is covering it all.
Breaking tonight, a CDC panel now recommending a single Pfizer booster shot for 12 to 15-year-olds 5 months after their second dose. It comes after the FDA approved the shot on Monday. Full CDC approval is imminent. Meanwhile, with new COVID cases up 98% in just 1 week, the Omicron surge has forced another major event, the Grammys, to postpone. The January 31st show now on indefinite hold, as hospitalizations are up 63%, deaths up 5% to 1,200 each day. Most of those patients never vaxxed.
Without a doubt, unequivocally, we are dealing with a highly transmissible variant
that spreads rapidly.
The good news, more research shows vaccines and boosters offer very strong protection. But the CDC is also under fire for offering confusing, mixed messages on its own isolation guidance. Tracking back to December with Omicron raging, a national shortage of test kits led to hours-long waits at testing sites. Rising cases led to massive workforce shortages and airline cancellations. Businesses, including Delta Airlines on December 21st, called for shortening the recommended isolation period for the vaccinated who test positive. 6 days later, the CDC did just that, cutting the isolation time from 10 to 5 days. CDC Director Walensky said she was worried people would not stay home.
People would feel well enough to be at work. They would not necessarily tolerate being home, and that they may not comply with being home.
But Walensky did not recommend people first get a negative antigen test before leaving home. Today, she insisted the national shortage of test kits did not play a role in that decision.
This has nothing to do with the shortage of available tests, because you can see in our quarantine guidance that we actually do recommend a test for people to emerge from quarantine.
But a former COVID advisory board member says the test kit shortage was a factor.
That's really about availability of these rapid antigen tests, and they do remain in short supply across the country.
Many sympathetic health professionals worry the CDC is confusing the public and undermining its own reputation.
I'm very concerned about the CDC toeing the line of whether or not we're basing our guidelines on supply, whether we're basing our guidelines on economics, or whether we're basing our guidelines on science, because it always should be rooted in science.
Tom, the American Medical Association just weighed in criticizing the CDC's recommendations.
The AMA says that the recommendations are confusing, and the lack of a testing component, it says, could cause this to spread even further. Hundreds of thousands of people returning to work while still infected. Lester.
All right, Tom Costello also here in Washington. All of this causing severe disruptions in the nation's schools. A domino effect on teachers, students, and parents as Omicron spreads and testing falls short. Stephanie Gosk has late details.
Late last night, Chicago school doors.
She's confident that those who lost their jobs will have more opportunities.
We have 500 to 750 jobs available in the Mitchell area.
Sterling didn't lose any money, but other Mitchell residents who purchased poolside room vouchers from a radio auction are hoping for a refund or voucher for another Ramada location. We contacted the franchise headquarters, but have not received a response. Unless another similar hotel and venue is constructed soon, Sterling will make other arrangements for her next gathering.
So next time we'll probably plan to go to Sioux Falls.
We contacted the former manager, Dan Sabers. He said he was sorry, his hands were tied, and he had no comment. In Mitchell, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.
The coronavirus update here at 6 o'clock. The Department of Health reporting nearly 2,300 new COVID-19 cases. The active case count sees another jump, now sitting at just over 12,500. Hospitalizations also see an increase to 287. The number of people who have died due to complications from COVID surpassed 2,500 statewide today. A bipartisan group of United States senators is looking at another possible economic stimulus package focused on businesses affected by the pandemic, including restaurants, gyms, and performance venues. The discussions have been ongoing since cases of the Omicron variant started to spike late last year. Whether any bill can even make it to a committee remains to be seen. Talks in the Senate are currently shelved, and a House aide says none of its lawmakers are in serious discussions on the matter. A senior White House official also saying they are not looking at another stimulus, but something small could be done for restaurants.
Sioux Falls Fire Rescue continues to build on its lead in the annual Heroes Behind the Badges
regional type packer. At our peak there this summer, we're short about 4,500 to 6,000 head per day of capacity, and so that hurt the live cattle market to our producers.
Since 2015, we've had a complete disconnect between the price of cattle and the price of beef. And again, that's what COVID has done, is it's now exposed the consumer to the market power wielded by the big four packers.
In a KELOLand.com original, Eric Mayer looks at the current state of the beef industry and how political leaders are trying to help fix it. Well, Governor Kristi Noem's proposed ban on critical race theory in South Dakota schools and universities has been filed. Her bill, titled An Act to Protect Children from Critical Race Theory, joined the list of pre-filed legislation. It'll be listed as House Bill 1012. However, the words critical race theory are only in the title. The rest of the proposal doesn't make any actual reference to it. State lawmakers start the 2022 session on Tuesday.
Many people don't think twice about buying basic items for their everyday life, but it's not the case for everyone. KELOLAND's Kelly Volk highlights an upcoming event aimed at helping people in need.
The Pad Party is gearing up for its annual product drive. This month, the group will be gathering pads, tampons, and incontinence products. The items will be delivered to the banquet to be given to people in need.
In the last 5 years, we have been able to stock the banquet with product for an entire year.
New this year, the Pad Party is partnering with the Promising Futures Fund, an organization that supports students in schools with high rates of poverty in the Sioux Falls School District. Money raised will help supply schools with menstrual products.
I don't think the community of Sioux Falls realizes how many families are struggling financially to the extent that they are struggling financially. And the more awareness we can bring to this, the better we are.
This year, especially with inflation happening, we know that the choice between buying groceries and buying feminine products for yourself, you might choose to not buy those products, and we want to try to fill that gap as much as we can, especially in a year where we're seeing a lot of inflation.
Which is why year after year, the Pad Party works to get these essentials to those in need. In Sioux Falls, Kelly Volk, KELOLAND News.
The group will be collecting the menstrual products at Minor Brewing Company and Prairie Berry Winery in Sioux Falls on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is January 17th. The event runs from 4 to 6 p.m. If you can't make it to the event, you can bring your donations to one of several drop-off locations in Sioux Falls from January 10th until the 16th. You can also donate money through the Promising Futures Fund. For all of the details and where to donate, head to this story on KELOLAND.com.
Tomorrow's going to be the coldest day of the week. What's it going to do next week? We'll talk about that next. It's a sign of just how cold it is. We're going to show you a few of the sundog pictures from our viewers coming up next.
News at 6.
Devices have been seized. 20,000 hours of video footage have been gone through. And yet, no subpoenas or any witnesses that we've heard about against Trump or anyone high up in that inner circle. Does that worry you, Donald?
Well, I think it's probably the case, because we probably would have heard had there been such subpoenas that they had in fact been issued. We don't know that for sure, but there's been an enormous amount of work in the cases that they've had now. I think I agree with Ellie that it would, in hindsight now, have been better if they had gotten started sooner on focusing on the people at the top. And I say that not really knowing, because we have no right to know and no way to know just what's been going on. But I think we wrote that in the New York Times column that we did, that it didn't seem that that was happening. What I take heart in now is that this Attorney General, who I know a little bit myself personally, and I know him to be a person of great integrity, and he has now told us in no uncertain terms what his commitment is. And I take him at his word. And I think we're going to be seeing things. I think we're right. I think, Ellie, we have to look and see what does happen now. But I'm optimistic that things are going to be happening now, because he's told us in no uncertain terms, and he's not a man who would lie.
No.
Failure of security, of extremists kind of all coalescing around the Capitol, or was this something greater?
Members of the far-right Proud Boys and Oath Keepers have been charged with conspiracy, but court documents say they were preparing for violence in the streets. And the FBI has yet to figure out who planted 2 pipe bombs last January 5th at Republican and Democratic National Headquarters. No breakthrough so far, despite releasing surveillance video showing the suspected bomber that night on Capitol Hill.
Why don't you know yet who placed these bombs the night before the riot?
They're covered from head to toe, right? They have a hoodie on, glasses, a mask, gloves. You know, fully clothed.
The FBI has even compiled this map showing the bombing suspects' movements that night.
What do you see in the video of that person? What are they doing?
The person's walking down this road here.
One bomb was placed just outside the Democratic office entrance.
Pretty close to that corner?
Yeah, pretty close to that area right around there.
Tonight, Attorney General Merrick Garland says the Justice Department is committed to holding everyone accountable at any level who was criminally responsible for the riot, whether they were at the Capitol that day or not. Lester?
All right, Pete Williams tonight. Thank you. And in 60 seconds, our alarming look inside the movement that tried to overturn the election and growing concern about the midterms.
Truthfully, it's frustrating to see how fast.
To order, call 800-280.
A lot of the state legislature and can't even be fired for this.
That's right. The case has simply never been more obvious than it's been made the last 2 years, Leland. You know, your segment with Anna just walked through what happens when you are in a situation like the case in Chicago, where the union is the most powerful political machine. They help elect politicians, and then they sit across the table from those politicians and negotiate their contracts. They have the protection from the state legislature in Illinois, and this is what happens. And so what we need to be doing is putting families in control. There's no reason now that states and local governments are flush with cash that we can't have dollars follow students, put families in control, and allow kids to get the education they deserve, that they need, that their families think is right for them, the demand for the teachers union notwithstanding.
Yeah, Kerry, we've seen
need to know, such as our school teaching skilled trades and how to be a man and how to, you know, tie a tie and how to talk to people, etc. They wouldn't be in these areas. They wouldn't be living their lives about to go to jail and throwing their lives away at just 12 years old, 13 years old. So you expecting the kid that can't read and write in a city with no recreation, etc., to go and be some type of a great person? That's absolutely nonsense. And these teachers who are trying their hardest to teach differently, but they're being handcuffed by the system as well. We have to get out of that toxic relationship with our systems and create systems of our own.
You know, all roads lead to bad government. Government in general, government is rarely good. We got to stop the system. We got to take the power back, and that's exactly what you're doing, King. Thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
So the Democrats are planning a big party for January 6th, and Dan Bongino, well, you know what he does best. He's going to crash the party. That's next.
Matthew Dowd, thank you both very much. Up next on the ReadOut.
Involved must be held accountable, and there is no higher priority for us at the Department of Justice.
Ah, yes, Merrick the Mild. Is Merrick Garland doing enough to bring the coup plotters, not just the insurrectionist mob, to justice? Plus, the fight over how to send students back to school safely boils over in Chicago. But it's not just Chicago. Parents and teachers need answers now. Also demanding answers, Ben Frazier, the Jacksonville activist, was put in handcuffs for the heinous crime of trying to listen to a Ron DeSantis news conference. Frazier joins me live. And while DeSantis could be the absolute worst pretty much any night, we have found a group of people who deserve it more on the eve of January 6th. The ReadOut continues after this.
How did
New Orleans meant
it will be easier for them to do so. That's what this is all about.
Some of those Secretary of State candidates backed by Mr. Trump, who's endorsed Mark Fincham in Arizona.
By removing the fraud, Donald Trump won.
Election denier Christina Caramo in Michigan.
That makes us feel like they're complicit in stealing the election from the American people.
And Jody Hice in Georgia, a congressman who led an objection to his own state's results.
We have lost election integrity in Georgia. We have lost election confidence in Georgia.
And that Georgia race highlights what's at stake. Hice, who declined our request for an interview, is challenging the current Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, the man who famously resisted Mr. Trump's pressure to overturn Georgia's election results.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Raffensperger's refusal protected the legitimate results in Georgia, but he's been out fundraised by Hice.
Is this the GOP that you want to be a part of here?
I think that we need to realize that we have honest and fair elections, particularly in Georgia.
Before November 2020, most Republicans polled by NBC News thought their vote would be fairly counted. Now, fewer than half do, showing why the Stop the Steal movement is so problematic.
It shouldn't be controversial to say, if I cast my ballot for this person, then my ballot should be counted for that person. That should be the least controversial thing in American democracy, but somehow has become horrifyingly partisan.
The big lie, eroding confidence and our democracy. Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Washington.
All right, up next for us, the shocking decision involving the world's top tennis star.
Your CDC in a press release publicly is a big deal, right? It's a direct shot. Are they right?
Underneath your seats. I'd been in Congress at that point for 8 years. Never did I have any real understanding that there were gas masks in the House chambers, let alone would have to utilize them one day. And thankfully, at some point, the Capitol Police found an escape route, and they were able to safely evacuate members of Congress. But many of us at that particular time thought we were actually going to have to fight for our lives.
And when we heard Congressman Nels refer to some people or many people, in his words, being ushered in to the building, did you witness that in any way?
Yeah, the Capitol was violated. Folks urinated, they desecrated the citadel of our democracy. This fantasy and fiction that, you know, for many people it was all wine and roses is after the fact spin. That's why the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee is so important in uncovering the truth, presenting it to the American people in terms of what happened, why it happened that day, and also coming forward with some recommendations as to how to prevent that type of violent attack and assault on our democracy from ever happening again. And Judy, let me make this one point about the Democratic and Republican members of the Select Committee, Chairman Benny Thompson, Vice Chair Liz Cheney. They're doing a great job. No member of that committee hates Donald Trump, but they do love democracy. They do love America. We all do. We do love the peaceful transfer of power, and that's why we're committed to uncovering the truth.
And you've spoken about how, in fact, Congresswoman Cheney approached you, even as the assault on the Capitol was taking place, spoke to you about how to hold President Trump accountable. As you point out, she, Congressman Kinzinger, now serving on that committee. They are, though, the very much tiny minority in their party. Have any Republicans in the House spoken to you privately, reflecting any views differently from what we're hearing from the Republican leadership in the House?
Well, the Republican leadership has completely abdicated any responsibility in the context of ensuring that the events around January 6th never happen again, and that they shouldn't be looked at through a partisan lens, because that was an American tragedy. Now, there are dozens of House Republicans that did fortunately vote to certify the election of Joe Biden, and I do have conversations with many of them. They did the right thing that night, and hopefully they will continue to try and do the right thing and stand up to the efforts by Donald Trump and his authoritarian co-conspirators to really obliterate American democracy, which would not be good for anyone, not good for Democrats, not good for Republicans, not good for independents, not good for America.
But do you think there are more than the 10 who voted to impeach him later? I mean, are we looking at a situation where there may be more, I don't know, closet Republicans who are prepared to stand up, or is what you see what there is?
Well, it's my hope that that Republicans of goodwill, beyond Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and those who voted to hold Donald Trump accountable for inciting that violent insurrection through their impeachment vote, will stand up and reclaim their party. Because right now the Republicans are not the party of Ronald Reagan, they're not the party of John McCain, they're not the party of Bob Dole or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush. They're not even the party of Mitt Romney. You know, they are the party of Donald Trump and a violent insurrection. Take your party back for the good of America.
Congressman, I want to turn to something that has grown out of what happened that day, and of course to challenge the election. That's the effort by Democrats to get voting rights reform legislation passed. Up until now, no Republicans have, at least in the Senate, have expressed a willingness to do this. But just in the last few days, we're hearing from some Republicans that that they might be willing to look at the way the electoral vote is counted instead of voting rights reform. Is that something that you think could be acceptable?
Well, it's not an either-or situation. We have to do both. The right to vote is sacred to the integrity of our democracy. This principle of one person, one vote, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people is really brought to life by every single American being able to exercise their franchise, choosing who represents them at all levels of government. And so we've got to elevate that because we have a voter suppression epidemic that is taking place all across the country. And the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act are critical in making sure we push back against that. At the same time, this principle of the peaceful transfer of power, which is central to American democracy, Republican presidents handing off to Democratic presidents and vice versa, that was interrupted and almost disrupted permanently on January 6th. And reforming the Electoral Count Vote Act is an important thing that should be done to tighten up some loose ends that exist right now in that peaceful transfer of power.
Congressman, in the time we have left, it is a political year, midterm elections coming in November. It doesn't look like a good year at this point for Democrats for historical reasons and others. Right now, is there one thing, what would you like to see President Biden do that could help the Democratic prospects this November?
Well, President Biden is doing a great job in making sure that we confront the COVID crisis anchored in science and evidence in a decisive fashion, and he'll continue to lead in that way. At the same time, deal with the economic challenges that we confront, inflation, continue to create millions of good-paying jobs, and then we'll have to sell the American people on what we've done, and we'll be able to do that, particularly when we get the Build Back Better Act over the finish line.
But my question is, how confident are you that can happen given opposition in your own party in the Senate?
Well, I'm very confident. You know, we're not a cult, we're a coalition, and so we have to work with the various components of that coalition, including Senators Manchin and Sinema. I believe President Biden, who knows the Senate better than perhaps any president in modern American history, he'll get it done.
Are you prepared to see big changes, though, in the Build Back Better bill as it is? For example, cutting in half the threshold household income amount for the child tax credit.
Well, the tax cut for children and families through the child tax credit has been transformational for working families, low-income families, and middle-class families, and I think we have to continue to keep it robust. But let's have a conversation and see what Senator Manchin comes up with. At the end of the day, we need a product that decisively makes life better for everyday Americans, and if we get that product, it's something I can live with.
So maybe something below $400,000 household income. Just finally, Congressman Jeffries, we know Speaker Pelosi has said she does intend to serve through the remainder of this term, but if she decides not to run for leadership again, are you going to run for your party's top position in the House?
Well, I've got a job to do as chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and I also have to go back to the voters to try to get my two-year employment contract renewed in 2022, so I'm going to keep the focus on that for the moment.
We will leave it there. Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the chair of the Democratic Caucus, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The attack on the U.S. Capitol nearly 1 year ago was based on a big lie about election fraud in 2020 and the hope of supporters for former President Trump that they could stop the certification of electoral vote results. But starting that day, there has been a new misinformation campaign to recast, downplay, and misrepresent the events that unfolded at the Capitol. Amna Nawaz reports.
They broke through barricades, assaulted police, smashed their way into the Capitol, and sent lawmakers into hiding. Yet even as the attack was playing out, there were already alternative narratives being spun about who was to blame.
There are some reports that Antifa sympathizers may have been sprinkled throughout the crowd.
Possibly Antifa insurrectionists possibly could have infiltrated some of these movements and maybe instigated some of this.
The Washington Times has just reported some pretty compelling evidence from a facial recognition company
showing that some of the people who breached the Capitol today were not Trump supporters. They were masquerading as Trump supporters, and in fact, were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa.
Yeah, in the first hours and days afterward, you could see Trump and his allies and supporters sort of groping for what the appropriate narrative was.
David Graham is a staff writer at The Atlantic magazine.
So on the one hand, you had Trump, coming out with his video on the day of saying, "We love you, but now go home." But you also saw people saying, "Oh, this was agitators, it was Antifa, it was Black Lives Matter."
That despite contemporaneous texts between pundits on Fox and the White House showing they thought Trump supporters were responsible. When subsequent arrests confirmed that publicly, the narrative on the right shifted to downplay the violence that day. Here's former President Trump on Fox in March.
Right from the start, it was zero threat. Look, they went in, they shouldn't have done it. Some of them went in and they're hugging and kissing the police and the guards.
There was no insurrection, and to call it an insurrection, in my opinion, is a bold-faced lie.
Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde at a hearing in May.
You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
I mean, it's strange to see somebody like, Congressman Andrew Clyde, of Georgia, who we saw in videos and footage from January 6th helping to bar the doors, suddenly saying, well, these were just tourists, they were walking through.
Another recurrent theme, shifting focus away from January 6th and towards protests for Black Lives Matter the year before. Republican Congressman Clay Higgins of Louisiana.
19 people died during BLM riots last year. Hundreds and hundreds were injured. 2,000 police officers were injured from BLM riots last year.
Voices on the right have also recast those awaiting trial for their part in the attack as political prisoners. Here's Republican Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona last month.
These are dads, brothers, veterans, teachers. All political prisoners who continue to be persecuted and endure the pain of unjust suffering.
So too with the death of Ashley Babbitt, the Air Force veteran shot by Capitol Police as she attempted to breach the Speaker's lobby. Here's Republican Representative Jody Hice of Georgia in May.
In fact, it was Trump supporters who lost their lives that day, not Trump supporters who were taking the lives of others.
Former President Trump reinforced that in a July interview on Fox.
Who was the person that shot an innocent, wonderful, incredible woman, a military woman?
The idea that they were all motivated by these good intentions. They believed the election was stolen, which of course was false. It was a lie that had been peddled to them by the president and many of his allies. But they were going in and they wanted to stand up for what was right. That they were sort of like the American revolutionaries or like the Confederate rebels who wanted to really uphold the best of the Constitution.
In an October piece in The Atlantic, Graham explored this idea, how those who committed criminal acts to stop a democratic process have been recast by the far right as heroes, patriots, and martyrs for a just cause, much like the Confederate soldiers celebrated by the mythology of the lost cause.
The fact that those people are referred to by some in these circles as patriots, what does that do to the narrative?
It makes them into the heirs of what was right. It turns something that was one of the darker moments in American history into one of the brighter ones, into a moment of unity and rebellion against what's wrong and standing up for what's right, which I think is really dangerous. If we can turn something that's an assault on a constitutional process into a moment of triumph and a moment of a sort of lodestar for what's to come, I think that doesn't bode well for American democracy.
These efforts could be working. An NPR NewsHour Marist poll conducted last month showed a sharp partisan divide over how Americans view what happened on January 6th, the legitimacy of investigations into it, and decreasing blame for President Trump, even as the former president continues to push the lie at the heart of January 6th.
The durability of that lie, where does that fit into sort of the larger misinformation campaign, the very thing that brought people out on January 6th in the first place?
Well, it's essential to the legitimacy of Trump as a political actor today. If he's somebody who had the election stolen from him, that makes him still a sort of heroic figure and a more legitimate leader, perhaps, than Joe Biden in the eyes of his supporters. And that enables a lot of other information.
Information, or more accurately, misinformation, questioning or undermining everything from measures to stop the spread of COVID-19 to the safety and efficacy of vaccines, from bogus stories about vaccines tracking and controlling Americans to campaigns to stop teachers from talking about race or racism in schools.
So when people in the Trumpist orbit spread misinformation about Joe Biden, or they spread misinformation about vaccines or about COVID, all of these spring from his legitimacy as, the real elected leader, which depends on the lie of the election being stolen.
For more on the misinformation surrounding January 6th and how it spread and evolved, I'm joined by two people who track and study just that. Jennifer Kavanaugh is a senior political strategist at the Rand Corporation. She co-authored the book Truth Decay about the rise of misinformation. And Claire Wardle is the U.S. director of First Draft. That's a nonprofit that tracks misinformation online. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being here. Claire, I'll begin with you. As we just saw immediately after the Capitol attack, there were already alternative narratives being spun despite live pictures, live reports, people seeing it in real time. In our latest NewsHour NPR Marist poll, it shows a divide on how Americans saw that day. 89% of Democrats say January 6th was an insurrection, was a threat to democracy, but only 10% of Republicans agree with that. How does that happen, Claire?
Because there was a foundation being laid all the way through 2020, and then from Election Day onwards, this stop the steal narrative was emerging, this idea that the election was not safe, that the election was stolen. There was this drip, drip, drip throughout November and December. And so when we had the events of January 6th, very quickly, very smart people began shaping these narratives that already had a foundation that made sense to people who wanted to believe a certain worldview.
Jennifer, talk to me about the role of news and journalism in all this, because you have studied this, about the declining trust in news, American skepticism around news. How much do you think that contributed to people being willing to say, what you're reporting, what you're showing me, I don't believe?
I think it played a big role. I mean, people get their information from specific sources, and when they see information coming to them from sources that they don't trust, they tend to discard that information. It's also really hard to change people's minds once they've made it up. So when people see additional information coming at them that contradicts that, they're not ready to discard what they've been believing for months or what they've been hearing from their trusted figures. The fact that people have such low trust in media plays a big role in their lack of ability to change their mind. And the difficulty that we face in trying to spread accurate information after the fact.
And Claire, we know one of the main ways in which that information was spread, even well before the Capitol attack, was on social media, right? We saw even leading up to that day, the whole Stop the Steal narrative, how those groups not only organized online, but then mobilized online, got people to show up in real life to commit criminal acts after that organization. What responsibility lies with the companies behind those social media platforms?
When you look back at the timeline, it was only September of 2020 when Twitter started marking as false tweets from the president, for example, saying that the votes couldn't be trusted. So I think the platforms weren't ready for this. And then as we saw on essentially January 7th and 8th, they panicked, and like dominoes, they all started changing their policies and deplatforming. But the disinformation ecosystem is really participatory and engaging. And that's what's happening on these platforms. Not that much has changed in a year. And that's what we should be more worried about, not to see it as a one-off. And what changes have the platforms made? And I would say not enough.
Jennifer, you've used this phrase, truth decay, in your work, and nowhere have we seen that more potently than when it comes to the pandemic and disinformation on social media and other places around the efficacy of vaccines and the efficacy of mitigation measures. And these are all things that are backed by science. They're backed by data. But as you lay out, there's declining trust in those two things. So can that decay, as you lay it out, can it be reversed?
Well, the challenge is that disinformation tends to have an emotional component. As Claire described, as participatory. It becomes part of the believer's identity. Trying to reverse the decay, as you described it, is not simple. It's very, very challenging because you're actually having to break into people's worldview and change how they see the world. This is a challenge for a whole range of stakeholders. Social media companies are one, researchers and scientists are another. How do we make data, whether it's about vaccines or COVID or election integrity, how do we make that data, that narrative compelling to people who are not inclined to believe it? One piece of that is thinking about who provides the messages. There's a concept of strategic messengers, trusted people within communities that are vulnerable or at risk for believing conspiracies and disinformation. Election integrity is one of those cases where identifying allies within the communities that are vulnerable to that information is a challenge, and I don't think it's a challenge that has been addressed yet, which is why the conspiracies and disinformation around the 2020 election continue to thrive.
Claire, you've also done some work on this about how people can arm
base, or is it Republicans as a whole who view election integrity, in air quotes, as a real motivator?
I have certainly spoken to Republicans who say that on the doorsteps or in engaging with constituents, that a lot of, shall we say, conservative-leaning voters do take this issue of election security or election integrity, or whatever phrase you want to use, very seriously, and they do see that as a really live issue. Now, as you're well aware, Leland, it's one of these issues that there's a complete schism in the nation about, because Democrats clearly believe that Republicans are trying to suppress the vote, and Republicans clearly believe Democrats are trying to essentially loosen the rules. And so it's one of those situations where the two political tribes are existing in different universes, I think.
Yeah, it's very easy to listen to Republicans on this issue and Democrats on this issue and think they're talking about two separate things. Interestingly enough, President Biden is going down to Georgia to talk about a federal election law. Most of the Republican laws, obviously, are at the state level. What are you going to watch for tomorrow as clues to how important January 6th will be politically going into the midterms?
One of the issues I'll be looking at is what you just mentioned. The degree to which Democrats try to link January the 6th to this legislative push about protecting voting rights. We've already seen prominent people like Senator Klobuchar do that. Will President Biden mention that in his remarks? I think that's key. Also, separate from what's happening behind me on the Capitol, Leland, of course, we have had the former president, President Trump, cancel his scheduled news conference on the day, and I think that is interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, at least from the sense that President Trump is, I can't ever remember him canceling something or shying away. The idea that he's sort of realizing that talking about it's a lose-lose is an important note. Niall, great points. We're glad to have had you. Thank you.
Thanks,
yeah,
Leland.
good to see you. By most accounts, the economy is booming, but most Americans, they're a little worried about their own pocketbooks. We're going to talk about the disconnect next. And tonight on Prime, a young father and husband, Chance Engelbert, vanishes in a tiny town in Nebraska. Marnie Hughes has more on that. 9/8 Central.
He can help families. President Trump proved what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
So everyone in Washington is freaked out yesterday when their car got stuck in the snow for hours on the interstate. But what if they had followed the same rules they've been pushing on us? You know, had those electric cars? You wouldn't know, because that kind of car would be dead because of the cold. We'll talk about that next.
The trauma has been most profound. She has used the impact of their trauma as a shield to push against what we're asking for, instead of using the money to make sure that we have social workers and counselors and other social emotional supports in our school system. We don't have those there. Beyond that, our mayor has got to figure out how to become a collaborative leader in Chicago. The fights with the governor, city council members, Senate presidents, all of those people do not help us in this moment. We need leadership.
Well, I thank both of you for taking the time out to be here tonight. It's a complicated issue and complex and very, very important. Jasmine Serta, Stacey Davis Gates, thank you both very much. Wishing you both the very, very best for yourselves and your children. Tonight's absolute worst is still ahead. But first, Florida community activist Ben Frazier was denied his right to peaceably assemble, arrested ahead of a press conference by Trump wannabe Ron.
At Fisher Investments, it can be hard to tell the difference between a real QR code and a phony one.
On top of QR codes, be wary of short links.
So you can look to see if maybe it is a misspelled version of the site that you actually intended to go to, and that could be a red flag. Or maybe a lot of times scammers use shortened URLs, and that is used to obscure the actual real destination.
The BBB points out how you can avoid getting scammed. If someone you know sends you a QR code, confirm before scanning it. Verify the source, whether it's from a reputable source or a government agency. Call or visit their website, and watch out for advertising materials that have been tampered with. The Better Business Bureau says you can also install a QR scanner before using one of these, which has added security. Some antivirus companies have QR scanner apps that check the safety of a link before you open it. If you've been a victim of a QR scam, report it to your local Better Business Bureau. With this Consumer Crackdown, I'm Sandra Jones.
A lot of things to be aware of. We're also going to keep you weather aware because things are going to be cold and there's a lot to pay attention to over the next few days. Tyler Roney will be your guide through that in just 2 minutes.
Only one station offers over 6 hours of news daily. Get your news when you want it with Dakota News Now.
My favorite feature over at Beds by Design is absolutely the adjustable beds. I work a lot on my laptop. If I'm on a flat bed, I strain myself. With an adjustable bed, it already holds me up, and it just makes it all around a better experience.
Hi, this is Mike and Sarah Schulte from Schulte Subaru.
New tonight, former Trump White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, once a close aide to former President Trump and Melania Trump, just finishing up a meeting with the January 6th Select Committee and speaking to reporters.
But I cooperated fully, and I will continue to do so.
It comes as the committee is racing against the clock to get to the bottom of who is responsible for the attack 1 year ago tomorrow. Ryan Nobles is out front.
It is the most sweeping investigation yet into January 6th. But 1 year since the deadly insurrection that came dangerously close to preventing the peaceful transfer of power in America, the House Select Committee is still figuring out what went wrong and who is responsible.
There are a lot of things that should have occurred in a more orderly and streamlined fashion that didn't. And I'm convinced that was, in my opinion, by design.
On paper, the committee's mission is straightforward. They want to write the definitive narrative as to what led to January 6th and what happened on that day. They plan to offer up a series of recommendations to prevent it from happening again. And if they discover criminal activity in the course of their investigation, they plan to refer that to the Department of Justice. It's that potential for finding criminal activity and holding certain individuals accountable, like former President Donald Trump, that is getting the most attention.
I think that there are a number of, as the chairman said, potential criminal statutes at issue here.
But finding hard evidence of wrongdoing that would rise to the level of the Department of Justice filing charges is no easy task. The committee, made up of 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans, facing a number of obstacles, from fighting legal challenges, including Trump asking the Supreme Court to block them from accessing his White House records, to putting to rest the big lie of a stolen election and accusations, yet again, of a political witch hunt.
It's very clear to the American public. This is a sham.
Many of the committee's targets are either current or former Republican elected leaders, tied to Trump. As a result, the GOP has questioned the committee's work from the start. For committee members like Representative Elaine Luria, a Democrat who represents a swing district in Virginia, that means investigating people she works with every day.
No one in this investigation is going to be treated differently because of their current position or their former position.
With a staff of more than 40 people, the committee has conducted more than 300 interviews. They've collected more than 35,000 documents and issued more than 50 subpoenas, seeking phone records and even bank records as they follow the money behind the insurrectionists. Their work done largely behind closed doors in office buildings off the beaten path.
The goal of this is not to go after a person or a group of people, but rather to understand all of the contributing factors that led to the events and provide recommendations moving forward.
And they claim that they are constantly uncovering new evidence, including a timeline of Trump's conduct on that day, a body of evidence they say will show Trump willfully chose not to quell the violence, despite pleas from his allies and his own children.
President Trump was sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office, watching on television as the Capitol was assaulted, as the violence occurred. We know that that is clearly a supreme dereliction of duty.
By late winter, the group hopes to hold primetime public hearings. They could issue an interim report by summer, with the goal of wrapping up their work with a final report in the fall, just before the midterm elections. A necessary deadline, because if Republicans take back the House as expected, this committee will likely be shut down. But the committee believes their work rises above partisan politics. They hope that their investigation will provide a clear and sober view of what happened on January 6th.
In this great country of ours, I'm convinced that sunlight and truth is the best disinfectant when you're dealing with a lie. Hopefully we will provide the proper disinfectant for what's happened on January 6th so that people will understand it.
With the goal of ensuring an attempted coup never happens again.
Like, if someone tried to do this in the future, are there ways they could still succeed? And we need to safeguard against that.
And as an example as to how the former President Donald Trump and his allies continue to throw up roadblocks against this investigation, in just the past few minutes, another lawsuit has been filed. This by the CEO of MyPillow, Mike Lindell, one of the former president's biggest and most prominent supporters. He is suing to prevent the January 6th Select Committee from getting access to his phone records. So far, Aaron, the committee's won all of these court challenges, but still, these roadblocks continue to be put up. Aaron?
Ryan, thank you. And next, the top men's tennis player in the world. He's been
about it. Nothing for accumulating snowfall. The next 10 days in Sioux Falls, barely above zero tomorrow. Teams for highs Friday. It's going to be breezy. And then look at the weekend. We're back above freezing to start, a little cooler on Sunday. Aberdeen, unfortunately, not back above zero until late Friday morning, but the weekend will be quiet, colder Sunday, mild for next week. More 20s are on the way. And finally in Pierre, barely above zero for you tomorrow, and then 30s on Friday and Saturday. Cooler Sunday, but then next week we have multiple days of temperatures actually getting above freezing. Andrea?
All right, Tyler, thank you. As COVID-19 cases surge across the country.
One national retailer is having to adjust because so many workers are out sick. We'll have more on that still to come on Dakota News Now, but first here's what's coming up on KDLT this evening.
Well, 1970s. We have sort of more mounting evidence that it does belong, including the petrographic studies, looking at the type of stone and how they match each other. And there is a really good join there, so we are convinced that it does belong to this sculpture.
It's that new digital technology that really turned the corner with making the decision that it does belong to the Cleveland Krishna.
Now, getting Krishna's hand from Cambodia happened thanks to another mythic Hindu figure, Hanuman, the monkey god. The museum acquired the sculpture in 1982, and visitors loved to pose with it. But in 2015, Sonia Ree Mace found through research that Hanuman, purchased in good faith, had likely been looted from his home country back in the 1970s. Cleveland Museum of Art director William Griswold contacted the Cambodian Secretary of State and made arrangements to return the Hanuman sculpture.
The Deputy Prime Minister and I signed an agreement transferring possession of the Hanuman to the Kingdom of Cambodia. Dignitaries from all over the world laid garlands of flowers on the sculpture of Hanuman, which we had shipped back to Cambodia just a few days earlier.
And that goodwill gesture from the museum led to the reunification of Krishna and his hand. For the past 4 years, the museum's conservation staff has worked to restore the aging sculpture to its divine glory.
One of the main challenges is that when the sculpture was assembled in the 1970s, it was assembled with no intention of it ever coming apart again. But over the years since then, the conservation field has moved a little bit farther in the direction of thinking more long-term and making sure that everything we do can be undone by someone else, because we've started to realize that nothing is permanent.
It's been a long journey, covering thousands of miles and hundreds of years.
I love the hand. You know, it's so subtle, like that index finger just bends ever so slightly. It never ceases to amaze me.
And in a time of national and international disagreements and tensions, it's an example of collaboration in the name of art and culture. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm David C. Barnett in Cleveland.
Thank you, Idea Stream.
I've lost like 28 pounds.
You look great.
I love that my clothes fit better.
Capable of optimizing your flight.
Moment. But it's important also to remember we are in a very different place than we were a year ago or 6 months ago. Historic records of job creation, historic economic growth across the country, historic low numbers of unemployment, low levels of unemployment, I should say, and 200 million people who are vaccinated. So we're in constant conversation, but in terms of a prediction of a specific request, you know, I would say they're constant conversations, but nothing new to report at this point in time.
Thanks, Jen.
Go ahead. Sorry, I will quickly get around to the last three. Go ahead.
Okay, real quick, asking one question on behalf of a colleague who couldn't be here, from Catherine Lucy of the Wall Street Journal. Does the White House see the teachers union in Chicago as an obstruction to overseeing schools? What is their message to union leaders?
So I believe I answered this a little bit earlier, and the president wants schools to be open. He believes we have the tools for schools to be open, and we're going to continue to work to ensure that students are in classrooms, they are in classrooms safely, and they are for the foreseeable future.
And yesterday, New York City Mayor Eric Adams urged local businesses to return back to their offices. We know that the president has said, you know, it's safe to return to schools, but does he agree with this message that, you know, workers should be going back to their offices to help out the, quote, you know, financial ecosystem?
Local leaders are going to make decisions about what is safe and best in their communities. I would say that we would really defer to them. Go ahead in the back.
About the upcoming Russia talks, what are you guys expecting? Are you expecting any concrete results after these 3 rounds of talks, or are you just happy with keeping the line of communication open with the Russians?
Well, I think, and hopefully I gave a pretty extensive preview of what we expect, or what we are going to into the discussions, the 3 sets of talks to accomplish, but I'm not going to make a prediction of what's going to come out of them at this point.
And just a quick follow-up, there's a lot of focus on if Russia does indeed invade Ukraine, we will have very harsh consequences for the Russian government. What about the status quo? What is the White House's position on if things don't change and they don't invade Ukraine?
Well, we are continuing to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine. We've been providing assistance, and we will continue to do so in the weeks and months ahead. And that is building on, of course, when President Zelensky was here. And we will continue to discuss, work in close coordination with our partners and allies in Europe as we work to reduce and de-escalate the situation on the border. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I have one follow on testing and then one separate question. The follow is, you say the CDC is driven by data, but I'm wondering what role the data about just the sheer availability of tests at this exact moment in time is playing in the guidance that they're offering. And once those 500 million tests and all of the various tests that the White House is procuring, once those come to market, could we see the guidance change?
Well, Dr. Walensky answered this question on the COVID with access to tests, and actually there's a wide expansive, we're continuing to expand the number of tests that are available, but it's not an issue with tests, their guidance.
A child who has simply been exposed to COVID in school is going to participate in a test to stay in school program, but someone who has actually had COVID is not required to test to re-enter society.
Well, again, I would point you to the CDC to answer any specific questions on their guidance. It's driven by their own data and their own scientists.
And then on Build Back Better, CNBC and Change Research conducted a poll in late December asking various demographics about some of the legislation that's been proposed, the state of the economy. Pure Independents, the group of voters that secured the election for President Biden, they give the president a D across the board on economic issues, and only 30% say that Build Back Better will grow the economy and create jobs. What is your own internal polling telling you about whether independents want Build Back Better and whether you should recalibrate for a different set of policy proposals?
Well, without getting into internal polling, I will tell you that Build Back Better, as you know, hasn't passed yet, and we are working to get it passed. And what we see in a lot of polling is that people like the components of the bill, but they don't know exactly what's in Build Back Better and what it means. And it's always easier to sell a package to the public once it's passed. So we are hoping we're going to get to that point. That is our objective. I would note that while the economic data is very strong right now in a lot of areas, economic growth, job creation, low unemployment, we also understand that the way people are experiencing, the American public is experiencing a life right now is through the prism of a pandemic that is we're almost 2 years into. They're tired of it. They're fatigued by it. While it has been an unpredictable, historic pandemic, they want it to be over. And their experience with the economy is inherently tied to that. We understand that it's less about data and more about what people are experiencing in their day-to-day life. It doesn't look normal. They're worried about there being labor shortages and there being canceled flights or not enough teachers in school because of the spread of Omicron. We understand that. So our focus right now is on doing everything we can to continue to fight the virus. We think that is the biggest driver in making people feel better about their daily experiences and better about, we know, the progress that's been made in the economy. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.